messing with him as he's walking in. Roberts are walking through the back door, and then we'll call it good. How's that sound? And notice we're good Methodists. The front pews are empty. I've had to apologize more than once at a funeral when we've seated the pallbearers up front, and then we've had a congregational hymn. I'm like, I'm sorry, we don't have hymnals in the front pews. We're not used to people actually sitting there.
They are here.
They are here. Thank you for coming out this afternoon, folks, for this, my inferior version of two of the town hall meetings I've heard on this, one by the Reverend Dr. Mark Holland from Kansas City, Kansas. Not only is he a pastor on sabbatical down there, he was also the mayor of Kansas City, Kansas for a number of years. And Mark is one of the most eloquent individuals I have ever heard, and one who is truly seeking a way forward in unity. The other one was our Bishop Sines, who came to Lincoln. Some of you were able to come to that, and I was frankly impressed and blown away by the number of Seward parishioners who made it down to Lincoln for the Bishop's Town Hall meeting. So thank you for being a congregation that is engaged in the global church. In many places I've served, it's not always been the case. Some of the places I've been have been very insular, and they're like, yeah, they'll do whatever. I'm glad you're actually interested in the bigger topics. As we get started, let's start with a word of prayer, shall we? Gracious and everlasting God, we thank you for your presence in our lives always, and we ask that your Holy Spirit offer wisdom, compassion, and courage in this day and in the weeks and months to come as we lead up to February 23rd. And we ask that your Holy Spirit rest upon our General Conference delegates from the Great Plains Conference to guide their vote for the best way forward for our church. We pray this in the name of your Son, Jesus, and all the people said. Amen. Now, Wes has been doing a lot to pick up weight around here. Wes Robotham in our staffing gap for the time being. And he hasn't just picked up the things that Bruce was doing. Leslie has picked up some of them also, but he's been coming up with other great ideas. We now have a YouTube channel, the Seward United Methodist Church, in addition to our Facebook presence. So you'll notice he's filming because he has this great idea that if I want to reach a younger generation, I need to be on multimedia. And so Wes is making that happen. If anybody said, if you go out from here and somebody says, oh, I wish I had been there, but I had this or that, they can watch this on YouTube, on the Seward UMC channel, or on our Facebook page. So thank you, Wes, for your technological expertise. So this did not start this year. The conversation we're having didn't start in 1972. The conversation we're having started around 70 CE, probably a little bit earlier, probably 60 CE. And you can read about it if you want in the book of Acts. You see, the church had formed in Jerusalem. The apostles were all gathered there. The early church, the nascent church, was there in Jerusalem. A bunch of Jewish followers of Jesus who believed that he was the Jewish Messiah. He had come to rescue Israel, to finally free it from foreign invaders. And even though it had not ended the way they expected, they still believed that he was the Messiah, the resurrected Son of God. And then along comes a guy named Paul, a good, devout Jew, but raised outside of Israel. He was raised in the Greek-speaking portions of the northern Mediterranean. And Paul, after his Damascus Road experience, we're all familiar with that, Saul becomes Paul, and he goes off and he starts proselytizing to those around him that he had grown up with, but not the Jews, to the Gentiles. And he starts having great record conversions amongst the Gentiles. And so he takes the long, dusty road back to Jerusalem with a offering to the poor church in Jerusalem from all those Gentiles up in the north, and to help support this nascent thing that we called the Way before we were known as Christians. And he gets back there and he reports on his wonderful, wonderful successes amongst the Gentiles. And the church in Jerusalem goes, now wait a minute. He said, but they're not Jews. They're not like us. He says, yeah, but they're really excited about becoming Christians. And the church in Jerusalem says, they can't be Christians because they're not Jews. And so this great debate starts, and it's recorded in the book of Acts, whether you have to keep the Mosaic laws in order to be a follower of Christ. One of the things that is included in that was something that happened during the Exodus story. Apparently in the wilderness, from the time they left Egypt until the time they crossed the Jordan into the promised land, the generations that have been born during that period of time, now think about that, 40 years worth of births, the generations that have been born during that time, apparently they didn't have the tools to circumcise them in the wilderness. And so as soon as they crossed the Jordan into a place called Gilgal, they said, nope, we've got to adhere to the Mosaic law. And so all the males who had been born in those 40 years, yes, thank you for the cringe, all the males that had been born in those 40 years had to be circumcised. And this is the gross part of the Bible. They gather all of the foreskins together into a hill called Gibeath, the hill of foreskins, which is an image I do not need. But they decide that if they had to do that those many years ago to become Jews, and those Jews became Christians, the Gentiles should be doing the same thing. And Paul makes this impassioned plea over and over again that they have their own way, and that doesn't mean that they can't be good followers of Christ. And he prevails. Thank God for all of us Gentiles sitting here, he prevails, right? Unless some of you can trace your heritage to a Jewish heritage somewhere, we're the lucky ones of Paul's argument, one way or another. And they decide that the church is big enough, that there will continue to be a presence under Peter and James that is centered around Jerusalem, that will be faithful Jews who keep the Mosaic law and are also followers of the way of Christ. There will be a group in the northern Mediterranean who are non-Jews, they are Gentiles, and they will be faithful followers of the way of Christ. And the two will have two different paths that both honor what it is to be a follower of the way. So we're not discussing anything new. It just feels that way. So back in 1972, we like to talk about it being traditional language, but back in 1972, we added some language to our Book of Discipline. If you don't know what that is, it's our canon law in the United Methodist Church. And in 1972, right before the American Psychological Association took homosexuality out of the DSM, their desktop diagnostic and statistical manual, they said homosexuality was no longer a mental illness. Right before they did that, the United Methodist Church met and said that, added language to our Book of Discipline that said that homosexuality is incompatible with Christian teaching, and that self-avowed practicing homosexuals may not be ordained, and if they are found ordained, they will be removed. So, it also prohibits same-sex weddings, obviously. This language entered in 1972, and it has been peaks and valleys of discussion about it ever since. It was sort of quiet during the 70s when we could still call them them. But as the younger generation has continued to grow, they've grown in a different environment than I grew in. I will freely admit at 53 years old that my journey of understanding has been one of evolution. But the younger generation has grown up with a different norm than I had when I was their age, when I was 15, when I was 20, when I was 25. They've grown up with a different norm of what it is to be a follower of the way. That is not nearly as exclusionary as we made it in 1972. This has been an ongoing conversation. It has been part of every annual conference I have been to since my first annual conference in 2004. At every annual conference, there's been discussion, and at every general conference, every 4 years since 2004, it has been a discussion. In 2016, it finally reached the point where individuals on the far right and the far left, the far traditional and the far progressive side, were saying that we cannot be one house anymore. The tent is not big enough for all of us, and we need to find a way to amicably become two separate churches, to no longer be United Methodists. And luckily, two pastors from the Great Plains Conference, and I am blessed that they are part of our conference. Not proud, because that's a sin. I'm blessed that they are part of our conference. Adam Hamilton, y'all are probably familiar with some of his book studies and the fact that he has that big old pretty church called Church of the Resurrection down in Leawood. And Reverend Dr. Mark Holland went up to the microphones. And Mark took the lead and spoke. And he called out the bishops. And he said, you are called to lead this church forward. And you're sitting there letting chaos happen. You need to lead. And so the bishops formed a committee, because that's what we do as United Methodists. We form a committee. And so the committee went away. Now, the committee is made up of 36 individuals. I keep saying 38, but Lynette keeps me honest. It's 36 individuals from across our global church: Africa, East Europe, Asia, South America, okay? Across the entire global church, to represent all of the different cultures. Some of the cultures that are represented in this commission for a way forward are places where homosexuality is still punishable by death in parts of Africa, right? And they came together to try to find a way forward in unity. They've been working since late 2016, and they've been in touch with the bishops every few months as the Council of Bishops have met. And the two have been in dialogue, and the bishops have said, develop this plan more, see what you can do here. And so they were fleshing out what it looked like to come forward. Now, and to find a way forward. I want to emphasize that this was a diverse group. It would have been easy if it was a bunch of progressive United States citizens, right? United States delegates. It would have been simple if it was a bunch of traditionalist United States delegates. But it was a global commission that was brought together, a commission that was commissioned. And so with much work, they've made one final suggestion last fall to the Council of Bishops. And the Council of Bishops said, we want a little bit more work. And they met with the bishops one more time at their May meeting, and the bishops said, I think we're ready. Now, the people that will be deciding this for us were elected as our delegates by the annual conference to the 2016 General Conference. There's a very good reason why the bishops didn't allow us to re-elect new delegates, because they didn't want gerrymandering. They didn't want us to try to maneuver to get a particular end result after the work of the commission. They wanted us to use the delegates that we had elected before we knew that this was going to become an issue, and I think that's a wise course forward. So you can't go out and re-elect your delegates at this point in time. You can contact them, and there's information about that. But in the end, the Commission on the Way Forward and the bishops have presented 3 plans, all 3 of which will be voted on in February of 2019, and one of them will probably be the successful vote for what the future of the United Methodist Church looks like. And you have a summary of those 3 in front of you. I want to talk a little bit about what each one of them looks like. The first is called the One Church Plan. This was supported by a plurality. I can't say that it was a majority because I can't remember, but it was supported by a plurality of the Commission on the Way Forward. Again, mind you, these are people from very conservative backgrounds, people from very progressive backgrounds, and people who are moderates. People from all different cultures. And to give you an idea of the seriousness of the vote in 2019, I've been told that the president of Liberia is still a place where homosexuality is a crime. The president of Liberia called in the United Methodist Bishop of Liberia and told him, if you allow a vote that changes the language to go through, do not come home. So for some of our African delegation, there are serious consequences. The irony of that is, regardless of what the vote is in February, it does not affect any part of the church outside of the United States. Think about that for a second. Regardless of what the vote is in February, it does not affect any part of the church outside the United States. The central conferences, as those non-US parts of our church are called, are free to modify the Book of Discipline for their own cultural context. And so they are free to accept or reject whatever is voted on, even though they have a right to vote on it, and even though they have a majority vote over the United States at this point in time. Okay? To put it in perspective a little bit. So the first plan is called the One Church Plan. And for purposes of transparency, I will tell you that it is the plan that I believe is the best way forward, okay? The One Church Plan works something like this. We removed the language that was put into the Book of Discipline in 1972, okay? So it is no longer a chargeable offense to be gay clergy, or to use the full acronym, LGBTQ clergy. We no longer state across the board that homosexuality is incompatible with Christian teaching. But that doesn't mean that people have to deny their conscience. It tries to cast the biggest tent possible that all the United Methodists can get under. And here's how it works. The language is removed, but nothing has to change at the local church level. Local churches can go about the business as they have always gone about the business of being the church. Now, some churches will be more traditional and decide that they still feel that homosexuality is not compatible with Christian teaching, and therefore they are not going to hold same-sex marriages. They prefer not to have gay clergy. Okay? Fine. There's still room in the tent for them. Some on the progressive side will say, heck yeah, we've been waiting for this day for so long, I can't wait to marry my nephew and his husband. Okay? Because for a lot on the progressive side, there's a face on it. There's a family face on it somewhere. That it's no longer an abstract issue. It's personal. And they're going to say, I have been waiting for so many years to do my nephew's wedding to his husband. And their church says, we're behind you, Pastor. We want to be that kind of a church. So they're free to do that. Here's what doesn't happen. A church says, we want to be the inclusive church. We have a parishioner who's been waiting for a decade now for his daughter to marry her wife, and we want that to happen. And you happen to have clergy there who does not agree with that stance. They cannot be compelled to perform that wedding. The church writ large would find another pastor to come in and perform that wedding so that that person's daughter can marry her wife. A pastor who can do that in good conscience can do it, and the pastor who is leading that church isn't forced to submit to something that he doesn't believe in. On the flip side, a congregation can say, no, we're traditional. And a pastor can say, yeah, but I've been waiting to marry my son and his husband. And so I know that I'm not going to do it in your building because I'm not going to disrespect your traditional values. So we're going to go do it in the park down the street. And you can't stop me, right? And I'm still your pastor. Come Sunday, I'm still your pastor. And so it gives it the widest possible tent for us all to sit under. Now, individuals who are far traditional are not going to like this plan. because they believe that it still cracks open the door to not being beholden to scriptural authority. So they're going to be unhappy with it. People who are far progressive are not going to like this plan, because for them, this whole issue is a social justice issue, just like slavery was 150 years ago. And as long as one person's a slave, everybody's a slave, right? As long as one person's not free, then slavery hasn't ended. So they look at it as a social justice issue, and until everybody is free to marry whom they love, then there's still a social justice issue. A whole bunch of moderates in the middle are trying to hold the church together and believe that this is probably the best plan to do so. So that's my pitch for the one church plan. And as by way of transparency, that is the plan that Mark Holland is advocating. And somewhere on your handout you have an address there for Mainstream UMC. If you Google Mainstream UMC, you will find Mark's website set up where you can actually see some of his materials, and I'll get into supporting that in a minute. The second plan is the Connectional Conference Plan. The Connectional Conference Plan looks like this. We would dissolve let me back up. Our church belongs to the Great Plains Annual Conference. The Great Plains Annual Conference belongs to one of 6 jurisdictional districts in the United States. In our case, the South Central. There's the Southeast, the Northeast, the South Central, the North Central, the Southwest, and the Northwest. We happen to be in the South Central. It would dissolve all those jurisdictional conferences. The real work that the jurisdictional conferences do every 4 years is elect bishops that will serve in that jurisdiction. Okay, they don't do the legislation like the General Conference, but we would dissolve all 6 of those and create 3. One would be the traditional conference. One would be the moderate conference, which looks like the one church plan. Okay, churches in there could decide, clergy in there could decide. And the other one would be the progressive one, where everybody's included in the tent. Okay? Annual conferences would decide which, okay, follow me, because this is where this one gets interesting. Annual conferences would decide which one of those 3 silos they wanted to fit into. Okay, so say the Great Plains Conference fits into the middle way, the one church conference. But an individual church doesn't want to be what the Great Plains Conference wants to be, so they can split off from the Great Plains Conference even though they're in the Great Plains, and they can go over to the traditional or the progressive. Getting confused yet? And clergy can decide that they, even though they reside in the Great Plains Conference, they want to be traditional, so they can split off from the Great Plains Conference even though they are serving in the Great Plains geographical area. Okay? Think that's going to be any logistical problem? Even if that were to work, here's anybody study statistics in college? Anybody enjoy it? That was one of the few classes that I really didn't have to study, and I got a B+. It just came natural. Must have been those years playing dice. I'm just kidding. In order for this plan to pass, it would require constitutional changes. Okay? Our Constitution is slightly different from our Book of Discipline. It would require 16 constitutional changes. Each constitutional change in itself, each one individually, would require at least a 2/3 vote of the General Conference in order to pass. All 16 of those would have to pass with a 2/3 vote in order for the plan to prevail. Then that plan would go to all of the annual conferences, who would then have to have a 2/3 vote on each one of the 16 individual constitutional changes. Anybody doing the statistics on this yet? What are the chances of that passing? Yeah, and if it didn't pass, you know where we'd be in the next General Conference? Right back where we are now, right? So I applaud the Commission on the Way Forward for trying to give us a diverse set of plans. But from the sheer statistics of trying to pass the connectional plan, it ain't gonna happen, okay? We would be spinning our wheels. The final plan, and I know Merlin has read all 92 pages. God bless you for being for taking on the time. I've read all 92 pages. As you're reading through the 92 pages, they put up what each proposal is, then they do a summary of the changes that will take place, and then they list the financial implications and the jurisdictional ramifications. And when you get to the top of the traditionalist plan, there's one thing that is included in that is not included in any of the others. You remember what that was?
You would have put me on the spot.
No. A disclaimer. A disclaimer from the commission on the way forward that said, this is not our finished work. They had started down this path to give us the largest possible menu of choices. But as they continue to do their work as this global representative body, the more they realized that this was not a globally representative plan, that it would not be inclusive to the church writ large. And so they sort of, and with the permission of the bishops, that sort of languished on the shelf while they worked out the other two plans and fleshed them out because they had limited time. They're working as volunteers, right? So that one languished. It wasn't until May of this year that as I understand it wasn't until May of this year that a minority of bishops insisted that that unfinished traditionalist plan be included. And let me tell you what the traditionalist plan looks like. It not only keeps the language that is currently in our Book of Discipline, it tightens it. No longer is it that you would be a self-avowed practicing homosexual. See, that's always been sort of the thin net to catch you. Self-avowed, yeah. Practicing, proven. It's always been sort of the thin safety net. It will take out the practicing. Self-avowed is good enough, and you're not good enough if you are. So it would tighten up the language that currently exists. Beyond that, active bishops would have to certify that they will adhere to the discipline. What does that mean? First of all, we've had activist bishops who have been retired, particularly one in New York who wanted to marry his son and his son's husband. And he figured this was a social justice issue. And so he performed the wedding and was brought up on church charges. And he figured, I'm a retired bishop, what do I have to lose? But he did it, even risking his credentials as a United Methodist bishop. All bishops, some bishops have refused to bring charges against individual pastors who have committed acts of protest and performed same-sex marriages. Okay? They've refused to bring charges against them even though somebody has charged them. We also have Bishop Karen Olivetti over the Big Skies Conference to our west, who is the first openly gay married bishop in the United Methodist Church. So bishops would have to certify that they will adhere to the discipline, or they would be exited from the church. And exited is the kind word as far as I'm concerned. Individual annual conferences would have to certify that they will adhere to the Book of Discipline and its rules. I'm skipping down to the clergy section of the traditionalist plan. Clergy would have to certify that we will maintain the discipline or leave. They say leave for a autonomous affiliated or concordat church. The concordat churches are in Latin America and parts of Canada. So I can either be really warm or really cold if I disagree with the United States stance. It also tightens up the discipline, the penalties. One of the ways that activist annual conferences have dealt with this issue is clergy have been tried, found guilty, and in some cases suspended for 1 day from ministry. In other cases, they have been suspended for a week, from starting on Monday and ending on Saturday. This would codify specific penalties. A clergy person who knowingly violates the discipline on this subject, and this is different from other parts of the discipline, a clergy person who violates this part of the discipline would be have a mandatory 1-year suspension on their first offense and mandatory ejection from the church and removal of their clergy credentials on the second offense. Yeah, that is not a river that most people want to swim upstream in. So it would tighten up the language and codify what some of my friends on the left would consider social injustice, inequality within the church. Now, let me say this about that. Mark realized too late that there are a number of organizations, we've known about them for a number of years, but they have been very organized on the far traditional end. You may have heard of organizations like the Good News or the Confessing Movement. Those are not United Methodist organizations. They are United States organizations with footprints in each one of the mainline churches: Presbyterian, Episcopal, Baptist, Lutheran, Reformed, and United Methodist. And they are organized to avoid a progressive or moderate stance in the churches across the United States. They have been very organized. For lack of a better term, there's another one that came up after the 2016 General Conference called the Wesley Covenant Association, or the WCA. They've been very, very organized to try to get the traditional plan to pass. They have gone as far as to send delegates to Africa to lobby the African votes, because they know Africa is a majority vote at this point in time. And if they can get them to vote for the traditional plan, they can get it to pass, regardless of what other United Methodist or United States delegates think. Okay, they can outvote the United States delegates. They've been, from what I hear, gifting cell phones to various African clergy and bishops so that they can better do their evangelistic work. Okay? At the 2016 General Conference, the Wesley Covenant Association, as I understand, wined and dined the African delegates with swag bags and good dinners and all of that so that they could do their presentation. They have a substantial war chest, for lack of a better term, in order to advance their goals. Mark, with mainstream UMC, is trying to rally those of us that want to see the church stay together in the biggest possible tent. And so if you go to mainstream UMC, there is also a button where you can donate. And Mark is very clear about the amount he's trying to raise in order to send his own delegates to Africa, our own delegates, I'll be honest, to Africa, in order to advocate for the one church plan. And part of the strategy in that is this: if you can't vote for it, since it doesn't affect you, will you at least abstain? Okay? If you can't vote for it, will you at least abstain? Since it doesn't affect them, that just seems fair, doesn't it? Yeah. So Mark is trying very hard to rally us too late to keep the church in a moderate position. Bishop Jones always said that we had to maintain the radical center, okay? I had my agreements with Bishop Jones. I had my disagreements with Bishop Jones. I have great respect for the man. I was forced to read over half a dozen of his books as a seminary student. But I nonetheless have great respect for him. And the fact that even though I think I know where his views lie, and I could be wrong because we've never discussed it, he has always advocated for maintaining the extreme center. And I believe that he is authentic in that. I hope we can continue to maintain the extreme center. So, where does that leave us? The delegates have been elected. They were elected probably by Lynette and me. Were you at?
There was.
Yeah, okay. So Lynette was your lay delegate to annual conference, and at that point in time, it would have still been Dale.
It was in 2015.
Yeah.
Because we were electing him.
Yeah, it would have still been Dale and me and a woman named Penny Bittner from Faith and a lot of others. We took vote after vote after vote until we managed to elect our delegates. And so we can't re-elect them, but you can let your voices be known to them. There is a email address that the conference has set up that is gpdelegates@greatplainsumc.org. It is a single mailbox, so you don't have to worry about emailing each one. You can if you want. Their names are out on the conference website. If you want to email them directly, I'm not telling you you can't. But if you just want to drop one that they're all going to see, go and drop it in there. Regardless of where you stand, let me say this. You catch more flies with honey than you do with vinegar when you contact your delegates, okay? So, you know where I stand. I want to see the biggest possible church. A number of years ago, when this was being discussed, when we were on the third or fourth round of voting for general conference delegates, let me tell you something that happened. Every once in a while, you've had enough on the floor of annual conference and you just need a break. You'll see clergy streaming in and out because you just reached the point where you've had enough and you just need a breath before you can go back in and listen to more people coming up to the microphone and saying the same things that we've been saying for 4 hours now. So I walked out into the lobby of the place where we were meeting that day, and sitting out in the lobby was a good friend of mine and clergy person, and I'm going to use their names because both of them remember this. I reminded both of them of it this year. And both of them sort of smiled and went, yeah, it happened. I walked out into the lobby, and a clergy colleague who I love very much was sitting there, Corey Jenkins. Anybody know Corey Jenkins? Okay, good. Corey Jenkins is about as far traditionalist as you can be, okay? And so I sat down, and Corey and I have wonderful discussions about camping and motorcycles and guns. And let me tell you one of the great stories about motorcycles some other time with him. But anyway, Corey and I sit down, and we're having a good conversation. And the door opens to the conference hall, and out walks Jeff Adams, a classmate of mine from seminary. He was 1 year behind me. They trusted me as his peer partner, which is the person that's supposed to shepherd them through their first year. I don't know what they were thinking. Jeff walks out. Jeff is as far to the progressive side as you can be. The first year that we went to annual conference together for his social justice work, he got an award called the Jimmy Creech Foundation Award, to give you any idea, okay? And Jeff walks out, and he catches my eye and sees me sitting with Corey, and I waved him over. His back got a little bit straighter. Jeff walked over. I said, Jeff, I don't know if you met, Jeff, Corey, I don't know if you two have ever met each other. And we're sort of looking. Yeah, I know who you are. So sit down, join us. So Jeff sat down. I said, you know what I know about you two? You two both love fishing and hunting. I said, yeah, we do. So let's just talk about that for a few minutes. So two individuals from as far apart on the spectrum as possible managed to sit down have a civil conversation and get to know each other as human beings. And that has been sort of my paradigm for where I stand in all of this through all the twists and turns that are leading up to General Conference 2019. I want to be the person that puts a human face on all sides of the issue so that we know it better. The human face changes everything. I have another pastor that I respect very much who serves in this conference, and I hadn't told him that I was going to share his story, so I won't use his name. He was my associate pastor when I was still laity at Omaha St. Luke. And for years, he was a staunch traditionalist. And then he had a revolution. Change occurs either by evolution or revolution, doesn't it? And in his case, it was a revolution. He learned that his sister was in a civil marriage, civil union with her wife, and the family had kept it secret from him for 15 years. And when he finally asked his sister's answer was, "You're a United Methodist minister. Your church rejects me. Why would I tell you?" All of a sudden, this issue had a face for him, right? And by revolution, all of a sudden, he wasn't the traditionalist that he had been, because this was his sister whom he loved, whom he had grown up with. It was no longer an issue. It was family. And that happens quite often from the stories I've been told. I've had a number of people share stories with me over the course of this past year of their own personal revolutions. It hasn't been always easy for them. And let me tell you one of the stories without naming names again. The individual came in to tell me about his son and his son's husband. And now, people on the traditional side, okay, it's your right. Okay, good. I'm still going to the right. People on the traditional side tend to use language like lifestyle and choice. I have a lot of gay friends, and none of them, as far as I can tell from my long conversations with them, ever chose a lifestyle. And this individual who came in to talk to me said, when my son came out to us, he said, "Dad, it was the last thing I wanted for my life, but it's who I am." Think about that for a second. Because you know why that might be the last thing he wanted for his life? Because we make it so hard to be authentic to who they are, right? And think about that conversation. "Dad, it's the last thing I wanted, but it's who I am." Okay? That's hard to put into the words of choice and lifestyle, right? If it were a choice or a lifestyle, that individual would have chosen otherwise. And he was very clear to his father about this. It is not what I wanted. Maybe it's time we honored who they are instead of what we want. So, I had one more story, but it's gone out of my head. I remember what it is. I want to share one last personal person with you. She is somebody that I have known since college. Her name is Sherry, and we have been good friends for years. Sherry has been married to her wife since Delaware legalized same-sex marriage. Go Blue Hens. Our paths have crossed many times, and let me tell you this about that. Sherry was raised Catholic. That's not where the story starts. Sherry studied psychology in college, and I studied business administration. When I went off to exploit people in the credit card industry, and it was exploitation, I'll own that. When I went off to just follow orders and exploit people in the credit card industry, Sherry took her psychology degree and went to work for Child Protective Services, probably making less than a half of what I made for a salary, working longer hours in far worse conditions with the least of these. I have been married more than once, and Sherry has been in a committed relationship to Kat for over 25 years. I am blessed with the United Methodist Church that has always been confused about this issue as long as I've been alive. But Sherry is not a Christian because her Roman Catholic upbringing specifically denied her humanity in this, right? But I'd ask you, Child Protective Services, caring for the least of these for lousy pay and being married to the same person for 25 years versus a banker who is divorced and exploited people for great sums of money. Which one of us is the better Christian? I'm going to vote for Sherry every time. And when we exclude people like that from our church, we're making the body of Christ less than it can be. You don't have to agree with them. That's okay. The One Church plan says that you don't have to. It says that if you don't, the church is still big enough for all of us. If you do, the church is still big enough for all of us. If you're still evolving, the church is big enough for all of us. And so that's my advocacy. And that's why I think that the connectional plan is a non-starter and why the traditionalist plan is a danger for the future of our church. There are good clergy who are gay, who are doing wonderful things, growing incredible ministries for the transformation of the world in the name of Jesus Christ. And there are straight pastors who are killing churches. It has nothing to do with how you were born. So, some people get down to the question of whether it's genes or whether it's chromosomes or such. And on the traditionalist side, not saying within the church, in strictly the secular world, there have been a number of studies that have shown that number of studies done on twins to try to prove that it was a lifestyle choice. And identical twins, and one was straight and one was gay, and so one of them must have made a choice in their lifestyle, and the other one is normal. I worked with two, and I'm not even convinced that it's genetic, but I'll go there for a second. I worked with two beautiful young ladies who were high school seniors at Garot's Steakhouse in Omaha, if you've ever eaten there back in the day when it was a decent steakhouse, before the Garot's sold it. And they were two bus girls there, identical twins, okay? Identical twins, except one had a scar down her chest because she had been born with heart defect and had to have heart surgery within the first 6 months of her life. Now, identical twins, identical DNA, but apparently something was different between the two of them. So if anybody ever quotes one of those twin studies to you, bubkiss. So, I have finally run out of stuff to say. Being a Methodist minister, it only took me 50 minutes. Are there any questions? Wow, quiet bunch.
You know, what really troubles me is why do the international churches, not in our contiguous states, have a vote that will affect us but not them? What's wrong with that?
So, nobody can tell me why we made a change in the early 90s, but we did. Up until the early 90s, when a central conference, as they're called, the conferences outside the contiguous, the United States, because we do include Alaska and Hawaii. Up until the early 90s, when one of those central conferences grew large enough, it was spun off into what is called a Concordat Concordat Methodist Church. So again, Latin America is a Concordat church. They are still under the Methodist umbrella, but they have no vote at General Conference. We recognize them. We ask them to send a representative so we can applaud them, but they were spun off into their own entities. somewhere in the early 90s, for reasons that nobody can give me a good answer, we changed that. And so the Central Conferences stayed part of our General Conference. And therefore, as the, especially the African church grew, it outgrew our vote. We're in decline, they're in expansion, yeah. And so it was a natural result. I could go with conspiracy theories. I could go with, it's one of the poorest churches in the world, and so we wanted to keep them under our wing for financial support, although I imagine we could have figured out different ways. But that's a great question. Nobody can give me a good answer to that, and there's no way to change it before 2019. Cliff.
Well, I just wanted to thank you for a very impressive presentation. Food for thought.
Thank you. You do have a voice, just like you can email Deb Fisher's office, and she may not listen, but she at least knows that knows what your position is. We have some great delegates, like the church writ large. They are a spectrum. I know of at least one individual who is hard traditionalist that is one of our delegates. I know of several that are very progressive who are our delegates. But like I said, the folks that we're interviewing that was the other part. If I can back up to the traditionalist plan for a second. I'm a member of the Great Plains Board of Ordained Ministry. And I forgot one of the requirements that the traditionalist plan would require that would affect me directly. Boards of ordained ministry would have to swear that we would not forward any candidate for ordination whom we knew was LGBTQ. Not only that, it would require individual boards of ordained ministry to do a full background check into the sexuality of any candidate coming before the board for ordination, candidacy, or commissioning. Yick.
Yeah.
Okay? I'm sort of weirded out by that, would be the most diplomatic way I can put that. Okay? I'm not sure how that works. And yet we would be required to certify that we had done a full background check, or we would be open for charges. So, sorry, thank you for backing up to the traditionalist plan for a second. Getting back to the Board of Ordained Ministry, the 20-somethings that we're seeing before the board, and boy, we're in for a treat, folks. In the coming decades, these people are phenomenal. But it's not an issue for them. They've been raised in a different world from me. I still remember Matthew Shepard, which was a turning point for a lot of us. That was a face that we didn't know, but put a face to the issue, right? Some of you here in Nebraska had Tina Brandon. Yeah, another face to the issue. And so the kids that are coming up these days, that's a non-issue. They've had openly LGBTQ friends since the time they were in kindergarten. At one of the forums back at seminary when we were discussing this, a woman my age asked an openly gay man who was on the forum, "How young did you know that you liked men?" He said, "How young did you know that you liked men?"
Robert, so let's say this traditionalist plan goes through. Because I notice it says that you're self-avowed practicing. Let's say that there's an ordained minister that is practicing but is not self-avowed, is hidden that, and someone finds out, they're out? Do they lose their status?
That would be an interesting, I would like to see the evidence that they were going to produce in court.
Exactly.
okay? I would like to see the evidence that they're going to produce to show that they're practicing without being self-avowed. And actually, the traditionalist plan reverses the language. It takes out the practicing and just leaves in self-avowed. And perhaps for that very reason, that you can't make a false accusation simply because you don't like me. Good question.
Do
Anybody?
you have a feeling where this is going?
I don't. All I know is that the far right, through the Covenant Wesley Association, the Good News, and the Confessing Movement, have been very organized for a number of years. And with the, like I said, the Good News and the Confessing Movement have been around for a number of years. The Wesley Covenant Association organized after the 2016 General Conference, and they have been very organized. We moderates, and when I say we, I mean me and my friends, I'm not counting you guys one way or another. We have been complacent in how easy it would be to defeat them, and it is not nearly as easy as we had expected. Now, go ahead. Yes.
A few things. One, I was very impressed with the process that's all gone on, with the commission that's worked on this. 36 people have put in a lot of effort.
Yes, they have.
Worked with that. I was very impressed. I didn't read every word in the 92 pages, but it came close. No, but that at the end of each of those three, the names of those who supported those were listed.
Mhm.
So there is identification with that. So
Mhm.
I applaud those people for putting their names on those things. But I think the threat that Pastor Roberts told us about in other parts of the world that may be influenced, that's what scares me in this vote thing, is they will be influenced to vote a certain way.
It scares me too. Did I forward to you Charlie's blog?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I had the good news in there.
Charlie is a Kenyan?
Zambian.
Thank you. Zambian member of our annual conference. And he did a wonderful blog comparing the work of the Good News and the Confessing Movement in swaying the African votes. He did a quite eloquent comparison to it of the colonialism of the 19th century, where the West is going to tell you what's best for you. And it was quite a read. If you wanted a link to it, email me in the office and I'll be glad to send it to you. Charlie is a very gifted speaker in general, and I had not known he had a side in this, but it was interesting to read. What else? Yes, Randy.
I'll throw one at you. So when the vote comes through, it's counted next year, and let's say the traditionalists win, where does that leave the rest of us, like especially in the United States, if the heavy vote for the traditionalists is considered in Africa and other countries, and understandably so, some of them are facing a government that may put them to death. But where does that leave us? Does that leave us in the schism part of all this equation, where we in the United States decide that we can't belong to the world body?
So each annual conference, if the traditionalist vote passes, the traditionalist plan, each annual conference will have to decide whether to certify that or not. For example, if the Great Plains Conference decided that they would not certify the traditionalist plan, they would have to find a way to graciously exit the United Methodist Church and find a Wesleyan affiliation of their own. If they stayed in, but an individual church decided that this was too traditionalist for them, they would be graciously exited. The cross and flame would be taken from them by legal force if necessary, and they would have to find another Wesleyan or non-Wesleyan church affiliation.
And financially, it affects you in the sense that you lose your building.
That is an interesting question, because what Randy's raising is that this building does not belong to Sword United Methodist Church. It belongs to the annual conference. There would be a lot of negotiation and litigation that would tie up a lot of funds, both at the local level and at the conference level, that could be better used for spreading the gospel of Jesus Christ. Go ahead,
Well, I
Lynette.
was gonna say, I think that the short answer to that too, Randy, is that there are so many questions with all of
Oh,
these.
true.
And so back to what Robert has said about keeping the tent big enough that the least cumbersome of all of these would be to
Yes.
stay with this plan.
Yeah.
But whether or not that's how the vote
Oh, I know.
is still up in the air. But, I do know that there are people who are really looking at this as a political football. And they're counting the votes. They know how many people are actually going to vote for the one plan. And so, you know, they're very optimistic that you need, is it a simple majority?
I believe it is a simple
And so I
majority.
think you need 440 to pass it. And they're thinking that they are close to that 400
Now-
number, and so, whatever.
I feel to some extent, talking about the one church plan to you guys is like trying to sell snow to Eskimos. But another advantage of it, in one of our meet and greets turned into a great productive conversation about this. And one of the individuals said, well, if this passes, what do we have to do as a church? Nothing. You're still the United Methodist Church, unless you decide that you want to be a reconciling congregation. At which point, you can hold a charge conference and hold a vote in your local church to decide whether you are going to be a reconciling congregation, one that does same-sex marriages and accepts same-sex clergy. The United Church of Christ has been using this very model for over 15 years now successfully. Okay? We are modeling, if we do the one church plan, we are modeling the best plan that has worked in the United States. Presbyterians went forward, split the church, right? Episcopals lost about 10% of their congregation when they went full progressive. Other churches, other denominations, and I can't think of any off the top of my head, have well, Lutherans always split though. I'll tell you a joke about that some other time. That a Lutheran told me, just to be fair. We are modeling in the One Church plan something that has been very successful for the United Church of Christ. And the person said, you know, Pastor, I remember one time when we had to have a charge conference about something contentious, and a bunch of people that were for it lined up at this microphone, and a bunch of people that were against it lined up at this microphone, and people went through like two belts on a machine gun. Okay, it doesn't work like that. The UCC clergy that I know, that I've gone to school with and trust, it's been 2-3 year dialogues within the church to not take a vote, but come to a consensus. You finally have to actually take a vote at the charge conference, but it's not a one-time meeting. You announce it from the pulpit 10 days before the meeting takes place. People line up like two belts at each microphone, like two belts going into machine guns. You talk. You talk for a long time, however long it takes, 2-3 years, before you decide what is best for your congregation. So, you know, this has been modeled as successful, as the most successful model in a United Methodist denomination. And so why would we choose any other path forward is beyond me. So, other questions? Comments, criticisms?
You wanna put a plug in?
Why did you only put up your hand when I said criticism?
Do you wanna put a plug in for Bishop Signs and the 223, 23rd?
Yes. So the General Conference is going to start on February 23rd, 223. The bishop our bishop strongly believes in the power of prayer, and he strongly believes in the communal power of prayer. If you are around Pastor Jo Ellen at 2:23 in any given afternoon, you will hear her phone go off. And Pastor Jo Ellen will pause with anybody that is around her and have a prayer. That is what the bishop has asked, that at 2:23 every afternoon, that you pause and say a prayer for the United Methodist Church and our way forward. So, set the alarms on your smartphones for 2:23 in the afternoon.
PM. PM, totally PM.
I asked.
For her. For me, I'm still likely up at 2:23 a.m. But set an alarm and join us in communal prayer wherever you are, that we may find the best way forward for our denomination. You know, the last time we faced something this contentious was in 1860. And we split the church then. That was easy compared to what we would go through this time, because there was a geographic line running down the center of the country. But if you read any of the history, the border states had it the worst, right? Because it wasn't a clear decision one way or another for them. We're not going to have clear geographical lines this time. When my mother was growing up and the Polish National Catholic Church split from the Roman Catholic Church over issues of finances, and there was a cathedral for each in Scranton, Pennsylvania, the kids would pass each other going to either Catholic school and throw rocks and insults across the street at each other. Gee, I don't want to see that happen with the Methodist Church. You know? So, what else? You weren't raising your hand, you were just, Lori, you did some sort of a hand motion back there. Or, I'm sorry, not Lori.
No.
My apologies. Where is Lori?
I thought Bruce.
There you are.
was-
I knew you were somewhere in this field of vision. You thought Bruce?
Well, Bruce had his hand up once, but I don't know, maybe he got an answer.
Oh, I come from, I wasn't born in this denomination, United Church of Christ. And I've talked to a friend of mine who has been on the faculty of K-State, and they have a very large downtown church. And since that vote has been done in that, he said, our church is finally growing again downtown. He says, and we have 20 female couples that now attend our church who are the hardest workers we've had. And he's
What town?
Manhattan.
Okay, so what Bruce said, for those of you who can't hear, and now I get why he's sitting over there going, yes, yes, when I'm talking about the UCC. Bruce was raised UCC, and okay, and he said he still has a friend down in Manhattan that teaches at K-State, and their local UCC church, which is downtown in Manhattan, had the vote to become what's called a reconciling congregation. How long ago? Few years?
The last 2 years. I think.
In the last 2 years, and they've seen their church start to grow, including the fact, his friend said, they have 20 female married couples in the church now who are some of the hardest working disciples in the church that the church has seen in years.
I think they want to prove themselves.
I think they're just excited.
Well, yeah, but I think that people are a little, what are they gonna do once they get in the church?
Okay, thank you. What else?
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
It was a good presentation.
God bless you all for coming out today. Thank you for taking some time out of a warm, sticky Sunday, when it could be the last warm, sticky Sunday we have before a blizzard, because this is Nebraska.
I don't think so.
No, next week.
And then
Wes, are we out?
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Wes.